Hi everyone, welcome to the Persuasion Equation. My name is Brooke Jamieson. I'm the experience lead at PlaceOS. And before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm broadcasting from today, the Yagara and Turrbal people. And I want to acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. I know a lot of the audience for NDC is global, so if this doesn't make sense to you, please reach out to me and I will put you in touch with some resources that can help explain a little bit more about Australia and our history. So, to get started. When I graduated university, so I studied a pure maths degree, I wanted to not do maths for a bit. So I became a marketing manager. And I applied a lot of data analysis to web optimization and e-commerce optimization. So after my first few months, I was ready to do my first big presentation. And I had got a great outfit on. I'd done my power poses before I went into the room. I really felt like I'd prepared everything that I needed to get ready, and everyone I invited was there and they turned up on time and everyone asked really good questions, and the managing directors who were there put everything I told them into action immediately, and it was great. And none of this happened. Well, I did study pure mathematics, but the truth be told, early in my career, I just really wasn't good at presenting. I think a lot of it was just, I wanted everyone to understand me because I was saying something, and being really young and a female in not always female-dominated industries, that was really hard. So what I've done is I've put together a lot of tips that I have learned through my own experience, and I'm really excited to share them with you today because regardless of what type of developer you are, or at the moment, so I'm an experience lead for PlaceOS, which is a smart buildings company, so I work with a lot of data from smart buildings. Anything technical, this will apply to you because my biggest thing is if you're going to work hard to get results, there's no point if you can't tell someone about them. That's what we'll be going through today. And one thing is it is really stressful to present about presenting. I'm not an expert in this field. These are just things that I've worked on over time. So not everything that I talk about today will be in the presentation, but that doesn't mean it has to be good. So what I want you to do today is take from this things that you can apply this week, this month, this year in your role, and then work out how you can become a more powerful presenter and persuade the people in your audience. So this is a cartoon from Drew Toothpaste, who runs toothpastefordinner.com. I've been following his work for years, but this is one of my favorite cartoons that he has ever done. So it just shows that when the work begins, I think I've blurred that enough, hopefully, and then you'll notice it moves to panic, all the work while crying, and then the deadline. I know this says a creative process, but this is really an epiphany for me because I think it's a technical process too, and anyone I've ever met in a technical role has worked like this at some point in their career. Across front-end, back-end, data, AI, all of them. This applies to everyone. So I have butchered this, and this is my previous process. So the project begins, a good section of it for panic, and then an equally good section for imposter syndrome, which I did separate from panic. And then you can move into problem solving and design and development, which is quite a lot of work for especially what I've done in my career and most other technical people. And then this red section is where I think the actual work is complete, but it's not. And then so after that, I throw some slides together. And by that, I mean I was just showing everything that I wanted everyone to know on a slide, regardless of how they felt about it, and essentially forcing them to sit through it, which happened when I presented my work. And then the pink section, which goes off the screen, is me being frustrated that my voice wasn't being heard. I spent a lot of time early in my career just frustrated and mad that people weren't valuing my work as much as I valued my work, but I realized that because I thought my actual work was complete so early in the process, I wasn't valuing my work either, because that does include presenting your results. And especially as someone, like I really like working with data because I really like when people use that to make decisions and when people use that to move on and do other things. That's what I really like about my job. And I realized I wasn't allowing people to do that, and I wasn't putting them in the position where they could do that just through my own processes. So all of this ended up being that my voice wasn't heard and my voice wasn't valued, which isn't good over time. So this is how everything started. And now persuasion. So what is it? I want to be clear that we're talking about actual persuasion today and not weird pickup artist tips or things like that. One of my favorite books is Cialdini's Persuasion, which sets out some key principles. And this is it's changed a lot since the book was released. I think this was released in a different time, and I always noticed when reading the book, lots of the general principles were effective, but some of the examples just wouldn't work if a young person did them, for example, or a woman did them in a male-dominated field. That just wouldn't happen. So I recently found a new book, which is Catalyst by Jonah Berger, and it's all about changing people's minds. And I think it's a lot more applicable to especially technical fields, and also as someone that works really heavily within new ways of working and digital transformation, changing people's minds is a really, really important part. And overall, it's all about convincing people by getting them to convince themselves. And that's what I do so much of. And that's what the rest of this presentation will help you to get to that point, because the book talks about it as well, but you don't really need more persuasion in terms of thinking these are some persuasion lines that I will use or something like that. You just need to reduce friction for people. So for different people, they have different sorts of roadblocks or different reasons why they don't want to change or why they don't want to try something new or why they haven't done that already. But you can only uncover all of that if you understand what the person's actually doing and where they're coming from. So the two key things that I need to persuade people when I'm presenting to them are, number one, listen to me, and number two, make a decision. The first one, because when I go into boardrooms as either an experience lead or a data scientist, I'm not the person they assume will be the experience lead or data scientist. I'm often the youngest by about 15 years and often outnumbered in other ways. So I really need to work hard, and this is something I learned early in my career, to get people to listen to me in the first place. And then the latter part of this is getting people to make a decision. So I'll talk about this a lot later, but with data-driven decision-making, that does in fact imply that a decision will be made. And it always really frustrates me when I work really hard on a result and nothing happens from it. So much of what I'm doing, I'm not really even necessarily wanting to persuade people in left or right direction. I just want them to make a decision. And that's often a lot harder, but it's a lot more sustainable long term. So overall, the key to this is humility. So humility, because you can't go into a presentation thinking, it's my day, I'm the greatest, I've worked so hard on this, people should listen to me just because I've worked hard. And that just won't happen. You will have a bad time. So leave your ego at the door and really bring humility and empathy instead. So you want to talk with people and not at them. And that can only happen if you really understand the people that you're talking to and what they value and what they're trying to achieve. So it's not about you. And I've put this on another slide again to drill it in, because this is the epiphany that I had that really helped me to find my voice and to make my voice heard in different organizations as my career progressed. So just because you've worked on a project for months or even years in some cases, doesn't mean the audience has been waiting months or years to hear from you. They've got all sorts of other different things on in their calendars. I know working from home, people somehow have more meetings now than they did before. So they've got a lot on, and everyone's on their own journey working on their own stuff. So it's not about you, but that doesn't mean you should give up, and that doesn't mean you can't succeed, because if you work with this, you can find a way to win, and you'll make your voice heard regardless, but you'll also make sure that it's heard in the way that you really need. And so if it's not about you, what is it about? Well, it's about who you're presenting to, what they care about, why you invited them in the first place, and then why they chose to show up. And I think as everyone's been working from home for COVID, I know that I just said we had more meetings, but I think you'll realize that people are turning up to meetings less and less. And attendance is down because it's easier to say no to a video call or a video conference and things like that. But you need to understand for each person in the room what they're really motivated by and what they're trying to get out of this. So you need to think about what questions they might ask or need answered during this. Or what I like to do is I think of Guess Who with the little cards that flip down. And as I'm planning my talk and also presenting, I think for everyone in the room, what they really needed to get out of this and what they're really motivated by. And I flip the cards down in my head, and it helps me make sure that I'm presenting the problem in a really holistic way, but also making sure that everyone's getting what they needed and I'm not leaving anyone out. Or the worst thing that can happen is someone just thinks, this is not for me, and their brain switches off. And even if they're physically or virtually in the meeting, they're not there. So you need to keep people engaged and keep them thinking that it is for them. because that's why you invited them and that's why they showed up. So it all really comes back to this. And so data-driven decisions, it's finally happening. So as an experienced lead, most of my presentations for work have data in them. And I guess that's why I haven't really used data in this presentation. But I am firmly of the belief that data should lead to decisions. One of my pet hates is when people sort of, I think this happened when the data started and everyone was hoarding all of this data in this garage and they didn't want to do anything with it. They just wanted to have it. And that infuriated me, because if you're going to collect data, especially if that data is coming from any sort of survey or anything that requires people to do something, you really need to make sure you're using that to make a decision. And so people throw around the word actionable insights. It's a meme at this point, but the words do exist for a reason. So if you're presenting any data, make sure you're helping people towards a decision. Like I said earlier, it's not about manipulating the data to do one way or another, but it's all really about getting people to a decision and helping them to make an informed choice. So you want to give people enough background data to make sure that they're making an informed decision. And for a lot of people, this can mean a lot of education. And this can mean you'll have to explain a lot of things or you'll have to go around things other ways. But like I said earlier, you want to talk with people and not at them. Everyone's sort of coming with a toolbox with them. Like if they open up their toolbox, those are the skills and knowledge that they have. And their job is to apply what's in their toolbox to their job. Like that's essentially how different people come together to form a team and solve problems. So keep those toolboxes in mind when you're presenting to them, because that will help you not only understand what they're motivated by, but what they bring to the table and then what they also might be scared of. So much of what I'm doing when I'm presenting data, I work with a lot of people who are not data-driven at all, and so much of it is just empowering people through education to see that, oh, actually, I really can use data to solve this problem. But people just have so much anxiety, and I think a lot of people in development would know this as well. If you start to talk anything technical around non-technical people, they just get really stressed and their brain just turns off. So managing that is a really big key to making your voice and message heard, which overall will lead them to make a decision with what you've presented them. So regardless of what you're showing, if you keep in mind that you want them to have enough to make an informed decision about something that will really guide you in the right direction. Because your job is to inform, but it's really also to educate at the same time. And if you miss that out, it really won't work. And that's when the wheels start to fall off in a way. So the next part of this is that you want to be data-driven and not data-derailed. So I wrote a whole article about this on my LinkedIn because I was really mad. I was working on a project and someone else in the project was just really stuck in analysis paralysis, and they wanted data to back up every single decision that they were working on, and everything had to be absolutely analyzed, but it's not necessary. Like that works if you have absolutely infinite time and money and deadlines don't exist and sprints don't exist, but you don't always have time. Life isn't perfect to make these decisions. So I wrote this piece called Be Data-Driven and Not Data-Derailed because I'd seen so many people stuck in analysis paralysis, but I'd also seen so many people that were sort of extinct by instinct. So they were just making gut feeling decisions constantly and they weren't using data at all. And I really feel like the media in the middle is all about helping people to use their intuition, which is informed by data, to make a really good decision. And if you don't do that, you end up derailing everything, either side, through too much analysis or not enough. It just ends up, you go in circles and you don't really keep going towards the journey that you're actually trying to do. But being mindful of both sides of this and the sort of seesaw that happens, you can stay nicely in the middle and stay grounded, and then this will help you to really refine your messaging for each person in the room. Because when I'm saying that someone's analysis paralysis or I'm saying extinct by instinct, I bet all of you can think of someone that's like this in your organization now or someone you've worked with previously, and this is just them to a T. And then probably not going to change a lot. You can try, but it's more about knowing that that does exist as an obstacle and working out how you can either work with it or around it to get to where you need to be in the end. And don't forget that you need to get to a decision, regardless of what that decision is. Often I'm brought into meetings to help people get enough information to make a decision. It's not my job always to make them. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the time, my biggest value add is being able to get people people to a level of understanding where they can really make a decision. So don't forget that that's your job a lot of the time as well. Coming in with the idea that I know everything and anyone who doesn't know it is stupid is not good in a workplace or in life at all. If you can explain things to other people, you'll understand it better, and you can only build on that. And that's one of the things that when you see the difference between someone who's a developer and someone who's a tech lead, that's one of the really big key changes. They are roles. I think it's really to you can get that too. So a big way to communicate data stories. It's one thing to get someone's attention in the first place, to get them to listen to you. But it's a whole other thing to get them to remember what you told them. So you want to tell a story through your data to keep people on track with what you're doing. And this really helps people remember what you're saying. So one of my favorite books, absolutely not technical. If you like business books or books about startups, you'll hate it. But it's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And it is an enormous book, but it goes through lots of folklore, through different cultures, through history. And it really shows how stories happen and how stories change and how everything, through so many different languages and cultures, people always come back to stories. Because at the end of the day, that's how our brains are built this, and make the most of that. I know everyone says story data or tell a story with your dashboard or something, and people make LinkedIn articles about it that honestly make it seem fake, but it really does work. Our brains are really good at retaining information through story, and it also makes sure that you've got lots of opportunities to weave extra information into the story. But it means that you've got a really good opportunity to make beginning to end without leaving anything out in between. I'm going to choke, so I'm going to take some more water. Classic me. But this sort of holistic foundation is really good, because then you can define terms and grow from them in future. And you can really help your audience to make a good decision, because you can give people information without them feeling scared that they don't know something, or without them feeling like they don't understand what's happening, or they don't feel like it's for them. You need to help people understand, but you need to keep them engaged. And the best way to do that is with stories. I'm choking. Great. And stories are all about context. So think about the concepts as nodes and the end of connecting all these nodes graphs as context. That's sort of how the pieces fit together. Because often context is more important than the actual results to some audiences. And the specific examples are really, really important. And they can change for your different audience. So you could present the same key points to completely different audiences with different, you know how I was saying, toolboxes with different skill sets in the book, and get to completely different results by changing the context that links them together. And it's really important to think of both the facts and the context as separate systems so that you can optimize both of them. I think that's, I don't know if most people think this way with technical stuff, but it's really hard to put a talk together over time that you can really work with. So you want to make sure you're changing the context between everything and just filling in all the gaps for people so they get a really holistic view of what's actually going on in the system, so that then if they need to make a decision on that, they can make that. But also if you're guiding them towards a specific decision, you can use the context to make them feel like they've come to that decision themselves. So you really want to use it to tailor your messaging to people. And go back to your little game of Guess Who when you're flipping cards down. Make sure you're giving everyone the right info. So for each card that you're flipping down, do they really know what they want? Are you giving them the right info? And what's actually happening here? So if I have a CFO in the room, I'll always tell them something relating to money. I won't just say, oh, the product is this many times faster. I'll say that it's faster and this results in this. Or using less compute time means we're saving X amount of dollars on our cloud service. Things like that, relating it back to what they're used to give them the context that they actually care about. Because if you do results without context, you end up just doing stonks. You're just saying there's a big arrow, it's going up. I don't know why, I don't know what for, but stonks. And don't be the stonks person. That's not what you want. So You need to think about, for each person, when you're playing a game of Guess Who, think about where they are now, where they need to be in the future, and how you can help them get there. So when I'm thinking about this from a data point of view, I'm thinking about how I can help them get there with data. But if you're thinking about that from saving cloud compute time, or you're thinking of changing the way an application goes together, you're always there to help people on the journey. At the end of the day, this is why people have come to your presentation, because they're in a problem or they need your help with something. They know where they need to get to in future. That could just be that they want it to work. But your job is to guide them there and help them understand that journey so that they can make an informed decision on either whether to complete that journey or whether to think you've done a good job doing that journey. So you need to make sure you can get everyone on board. And the easiest way to do that is by taking each person through this journey, because you really understand what they're trying to get out of it and what the pieces are that are missing along the way. When I was saying earlier about the friction for each person and how you want to reduce that, that's usually what stops them going across this arrow. Like the friction or the things that have been really difficult for them, that's what stopped them this far. So working in smart buildings and connected real estate, my life is an endless battle telling people that I hate dashboards. So this is one of my favorite cartoons from Marketunis, is Tom Fish. If you are anywhere involved with any sort of digital transformation or trying to sell an idea to a large group of people, you will love all of his work. But this is a constantly recurring theme in dashboards. And I have done whole talks on why dashboards suck, but this is still relevant here. So often you're just telling people stonks for no reason. So the problem with these dashboards is they don't have any context. The absolute best thing that can happen when someone sees a dashboard is that someone will say why. Like you've made a dashboard for a CEO, it's got all this information in there that tells them things, and they'll just say why, and you can't answer it with the dashboard. And I think it's really important when you are showing any data in your presentation that you're not doing it because it's just yelling at you. Like I was saying earlier, you want to talk with people and not at them. And that's the biggest change that can happen with dashboards as well. It's just absolutely useless. So don't let your slides turn into this. Burn this into your memory and don't let it happen. And so the easiest way to get around this is to build a story. So anyone that has been homeschooling their children during isolation, you'll know that these are the types of narratives. So who, what, where, and when. And so I always work through this when I'm helping people understand the data from their smart building. For example, in a meeting room like this one, there might be a Cisco ring camera, and they can do all sorts of things like obviously the video calling aspect, but it can also count faces in the room with edge processing and things like that. And PlaceOS, so we integrate all the tech in a smart building. So this also includes having the Office 365 Active Directory connected as well. And then we can also use Cisco Meraki Wi-Fi to locate people's either their phones or their laptops to triangulate the distances between routers and find where they are in a building. So overall, we know who the person is because of their Active Directory, and we know which person is in the meeting room because we can track their phone there. We know what they're doing, so we know they're having a meeting. They might also be having a video call, or they might have turned the in-room display on or off. We know where they are. We know they're in a meeting room, but we also know that meeting room is on level 11, or it's in zone C on level 11. And we know specifically where the room is, and we know when because it's all time series data. So if you leave the data process at this point for a meeting room, what usually happens is you get caught up in basic things that people just want to know. I think it's sometimes just like people like seeing numbers go up and down, so they just really want to know what utilization is for all their meeting rooms at any given time. So if there's 9 available hours, what proportion of that is being used? And people just really like to see numbers going up and down. But if that goes up a lot or down a lot, the best thing that can happen is someone asks why, and you're not really ready to answer that. So it could go up a lot because there was a tour group that day, or it could go down a lot because you're really not helping people to make that at all. And so building on this, that's the other way. Building on this, it's really important to add why and how, because like I said with the dashboard example, the absolute best case scenario is you display the baseline level data and someone asks why, because that's, for executive leaders, that is their job to ask and answer that. So you need to help them to do that. So like I was saying earlier, meeting room utilization could be because it's really high, there could be a tour group coming through, or it could just be end of financial year, or there could be a project due, so the project team working on it and they need to work in a meeting room, or it could be really low because something's broken in the room. And so the context of why something's happening is more important than it's happening in the place, or maybe the change in something which gives you more context is more important than the actual number, especially for meeting rooms. People assume utilization is 100% all the time, but it actually doesn't. That's usually not good if it's at 100%. So it's more about working out what is the natural state for this building and how do we get higher or lower. And if something happens, what has happened and how can we either prevent that from happening or let it happen more. So thinking about it in this way really helps you to link your ideas and tell a story. And like I said earlier, anyone who's been homeschooling their children through isolation will see this happen. When kids do writing tasks of any kind, usually the teacher, I think you'll see these worksheets and it's like, this is the introduction and the body and the conclusion, and getting your ideas and the arc of a story. And really go back to basics. Those frameworks work for a reason. There's a reason they use them in teaching. They are really helpful. And they're helpful because they help you get a lot of ideas and tell it in a way that is really useful and you can actually remember, because I think we've all seen kids tell stories when they're going in a million directions and it's really hard. But it's about focusing in your energy and your ideas and seeing what's actually happening. So the way to get around this as well is begin with the end in mind. So how will each audience member explain what you've presented? So like I said earlier, the dashboard, I think someone says why, and then you can help them with that. But overall, the best thing that can happen at the end of a presentation is someone will say, Brooke did such a great presentation. She spoke about A, B, and C. Those things that they explain it to someone else with, that will be different for every member of your audience. But the biggest thing is that you need to make sure you're actually giving them something that they can explain to something else. And if you're not giving the information to them in a way that it makes sense to them so they can explain it, you haven't done a good job of explaining yourself. So plan this from the start. So that's what begin with the end in mind means. And really go and see the best outcome for each person, so how they'll explain it, and then work out how you can prepare them for this. So think about what do you actually really, what do you need them to tell people, and what would be good as extra context, and then really weave that into your story. And so another tip that will always help is plan your take-home points in advance. Like I said, it's what you want people to do is remember what you've said and tell someone else. So all of this comes back to the take-home points, and these really shape the conversation in not only what happened, but what people perceived happened. Because often, I think we've all realized, those can be two entirely different things in meetings. So keeping these in mind will always center the messaging and center how you're talking about things as well. And so all of the take-home points should be notable, relatable, and retainable. So what does this mean? So notable is if something is double as high as it was before, or if there was a really big year-on-year growth, something that is enough of an outlier that people will ask why, and then you can provide the context for that why, which will help them remember it. And relatable is the reason that people say, oh, instead of saying it was this many thousand liters of water, they say it was this many swimming pools. Or when people talk about big areas of land, they say this many football fields. Just because it's easier for people to relate to and understand the scale and the depth of the results without necessarily understanding specifically what's happened. And I think this is really useful and something that should happen more in tech. An example earlier about saving money through time, even if people don't understand what the cloud is or what cloud architecture is, people understand and people understand that there's sort of different boxes for things to go into, and different strategies will have different cons, but this is at the end of the day. So always think about how people can relate to the information that you're telling them, because overall that will help make it really retainable. And another retainable thing that I think is really useful for tech is, are you using an old piece of code, or are you using an existing piece of tech within your business but applying it to a new problem? That's always really interesting, because when you can relate something new to something familiar, people are often so much easier, they're really excited to take on the change in a way that they wouldn't be if it was new. And people also really enjoy making the most of things that already exist. So all of these things make it really useful and just will really help guide your messaging. So when you combine these take-home points with the begin with the end in mind, this really is the key to doing everything, because these two parts, when you tie them back to the Guess Who game with flipping down people's faces, not because they're gone, but because that will really help you present effectively. And overall, these 2 points are really important because attention is finite. So what I mean by this, and this is something I really struggled with for a long time when I was sort of just like making these slides and shoving everything on them that I thought people wanted to hear, or not even that, just I wanted to tell people, regardless of whether they wanted to hear it or not. Every message that you include dilutes the effectiveness of other messages. So this is why when you see billboards, they usually only have 4 to 6 words or less on them. And that's because people really can only remember so much. So think about your idea is a pizza, but think about how you can cut it in. So pieces are quite small because there's a lot of ideas here, but if you had it cut into maybe 3 or 4, each piece gets more airtime and each idea gets more breath to sort of remember, make it easier to remember for people, but it also, by keeping the number of ideas smaller, it's much easier to spend your time relating to people, which helps them remember too. So overall, think about this, because at the end of the day, do you want people to remember barely anything from a lot of ideas, or really understand the few key points that you actually want to lead them with? And this is a really important thing. This is the backbone of marketing as well, but I think maybe that's why people in tech aren't aware of it, but it's so important. Obviously, there's always things, you always want to tell people more, but you can always have another meeting in future. It's just you might not always get the opportunity for that extra meeting if you've absolutely bombarded people with information in the first one. So it is a balancing act that takes time to work on, but I think it's really important to work on as your career progresses. And this is not something that has ever really been addressed. And this is honestly what stopped me from presenting and talking for a really long time. So how to improve when you hate the sound of your own voice? I don't know anyone that enjoys the sound of their own voice. I've never met anyone. Don't let this stop you. This is an actual fact of life. Everyone hates the sound of their own voice. It's weird. I hate it. Everyone hates it. But that doesn't mean that it should stop you from making your voice heard in the first place. And I think as well, like, I've never been to a talk where all I could think of was I hated the sound of someone else's voice. I've never thought about that. I've thought about what they were telling to me. So once you can get past this and work out how to work on iterative improvements that you can keep working at every time you present to make it better and better, this will be good. So what we're doing is just essentially, getting past this. And one of the ways that I get past this is by transcribing. So what I'll do is I will, my office has these small telephone, I call them, they're like showers, but they're not. They're quite small cupboards where you take telephone calls. And I'll go in and I'll make a voice note of what I wanted to say for a talk. And I'll record it. And then what I'll do is I put it into Trent, which is a transcriber, or you can use AWS or GCP, or even if you upload it to YouTube, it does auto transcription on it, and you can look at that. But this has been the absolute savior of me learning to make my voice heard, because I can read it instead of listen to it, which sounds like such a small difference, but it is phenomenal. So the best thing as well about being able to see things is you can read into so many more patterns that wouldn't have been easy to see, even if you could hear the sound of your voice and listen to it back. So there's so many ways this is really helpful. One of the ways that I do as well is I sort of chunk my ideas up into sections, and I look at the timestamps at the start and end of each section and look at my whole speech as a sort of like a line chart that's stacked. Because if you're making maybe 4 key points, are you giving each of those 4 key points the same amount of real estate? Are you really going into some and really hiding back on others? So it's all about working out how these actually fit together and how you want to divide your time. There isn't a perfect for it, but it's working out what works for you. And I think until you can get a baseline reading of what is actually happening when you're speaking, it's really difficult to do. As well, if there's something that you say all the time, you can see it loud and clear when you're reading it. Even things as so many different writing improvement programs that will go through and collect how many times you've repeated a phrase or a word, or maybe you're saying something that's actually grammatically not correct. This is a really good way to improve it. So what I will do is I'll transcribe it, I'll get a written version, and I'll edit the written version. And then what I can do as well is you can use text-to-speech to hear it back without having to listen to it. So you can go put it into AWS and GCP, for example, and it will read it out so you can hear it being spoken, but it's not necessarily in your voice. And this is also really important if maybe you are really bad at being assertive and you just can't imagine yourself being assertive, and it's so hard to imagine your voice saying it out loud. Getting text-to-speech to read it the first time really helps put some space between you and the idea of you reading it, and will help you to work on your messaging without it being the dread of having to say it. I think it's really important because then you can remember what it sounds like, and it gives you more confidence when you are saying it. If you're not good at being assertive in meetings, really make the most of this because it is really useful. And then so what I'll do is I've made my changes to the text. I can read it out to me, and then there's often areas that just don't make sense when you read them out. And so I go through and fix that as well. This sort of improvement, at no point have I had to my friends ask feedback. At no point have I had to read it to a pet or something, or just, like, it's so much less awkward. And it actually leads to improvements, which is the biggest thing. It's really hard to improve as a speaker, and I think it's only because I hate my voice so much. I've worked on these ways to get around it. I think this has been the number one thing that's helped me get into speaking in the first place, because it helped me get past the initial dread of hearing my own voice, but it's really helped me to improve over time. And all of this as well, the other really big tip is be a better audience member. This is something everyone can do regardless of whether or not you do any presentations now or you want to do some in future. Be a better audience member. So being a better audience member fundamentally makes you a better speaker, because you train yourself to be really engaged and present when someone's speaking. And think about good questions you can ask the speaker, not just to be a good audience member, but also because thinking about questions you might ask the speaker on a topic all comes back to that context we were talking about earlier. Usually the questions are not about a specific result. They might be, but it's more about how does that fit into the general context of what we're talking about. So train your brain to think of the context by asking really good questions. And another part of this is think about what the speaker's doing really well. I think this is really hard. I don't know anyone, especially early in their career, that enjoyed presenting. It was really hard, and no one really was getting any good feedback. I don't see it happening in the workplace enough, but it really should happen. If someone does a really good job, maybe they were really good at their body language when they were setting up to present, or maybe they were really meek a few weeks ago in a presentation, but today they really got it together. Tell people that they've improved, or if you really notice something good, at least you'll be noticing that something is a good aspect of speaking, and this will help you work out how you can apply that as well. Because bringing this back to the sound of your own voice part, sometimes it's really hard to imagine yourself doing the whole thing really well. You need to break it down into sections that you can actually achieve as smaller goals. And the biggest way to find these small goals is just to see people doing them. So when you are really engaged and present when people are speaking, you can think more about how you can apply what they're doing to improve. And the moral of the story is that other presenters are really struggling too, especially early in their career, or especially in fields where they don't get to present often. Maybe it's only once a year they're doing this. There's not many opportunities to be better. So always back them up, give them really good feedback. If you see people really struggling, work out how to help them, and really work out how you can help them be their best. Another aspect of this that I got in the habit of doing with really early career women is maybe those people in the meeting that they just get steamrolled. Maybe they've presented a lot for a meeting and they never get the opportunity to say it because they keep getting spoken over. Or maybe they've worked really hard on an aspect of a project, but there's a presentation about the project and no one's calling them into the conversation. Being a good audience member involves as well understanding this with other people and helping them to get into the conversation. Sometimes if it's someone that's really nervous on their career, I'll meet with them before and I know they're going to be speaking, and I'll say, are there any questions that you want me to ask, or is there anything that you really want to make sure people hear? And then work out how you can help them, with their permission, of course, and working with them to get that point across. Often people just need a few really early bursts of encouragement early in their career, and this will really help them to find their voice and keep going. And all of this comes back to being a better colleague as well, which is my next slide, if it will let me click. There we go. So I think when I've been talking about people that need help, I think everyone on this call will think of someone in their organization that would apply to. And I think it's really important as anyone that's mid to late career in tech to be thinking about how we can not only help ourselves, but help bring up other people in the organization and help people find their voice when they otherwise wouldn't have found it. So when I'm talking about these things of strategies that you can do, you don't have to do them alone. Find a buddy in your organization and work with them together. When I'm talking about adjusting the text, so you've done your transcription and you want to adjust the text, trade with someone. And it's always so much easier to help someone else with their writing than it is with yours. So find someone that you can trade with and work out. Or like I was saying earlier, how I might have a little sneaky meeting beforehand to work out how someone needs help and how I can help them. That also extends to maybe they're presenting and they really need some help brainstorming some ideas for context around their results. Especially if they, like really early career, they might have found their results and worked really hard on them, but they're not good at thinking about the different connotations for this, or how that could be extended in future, or what it could be applied to, or how the pieces sort of fit together. And that's where you can really help people and nurture them in a way that will 100% improve their overall career, but also improve the standard of presentation in the organization in general, which will make every meeting easier to go to. So find someone that you can help and be a better colleague. I think this isn't something that's often talked about with being a speaker. I think there's this big thing of everyone's Tony Robbins and you're only doing that. It's just this larger than life person. But it doesn't have to be like that, especially in technical organizations. So be a better colleague and really get to the point of what you're trying to do and how you can help other people get there. So my take-home tips, which I have highlighted for everyone because that's something you should do. First of all, the key is humility. So the presentation is not about you, but you can still win. And the next part is, why did they show up? So for each specific person, maybe they're the CFO and they want to know about the financial implications, or maybe they're from legal and they want to know about the legal implications of what's happening. But each person was invited and each person showed up for a reason. Keep those things in mind and that will help you shape your messaging and how you present the other messaging as well. And tell a story with context. So not just the nodes of the individual results, but the edges that connect them, which is the context of why and how. And this will help people pay attention and continue to pay attention and retain the information that you've told them over time. And you really want to begin with the end in mind. So how will each person explain it when they're meeting? You might then explain it to what will tell them what the key points. Have you given them enough information, both within the context of the overall presentation and in the take-home point you give them, to be able to apply your results and explain them to someone else. Make sure you're planning everything around them, because I think especially one of the things that I struggle so much with these presentations, as you saw at the panic at the start of my chart above when it was a big line graph of just like panic and imposter syndrome, all of that was because I don't really know how to start things. And I find that aspect really difficult. So working out how you can start consistently is often the biggest piece of the puzzle that you can just get knocked over, and you can work out the key parts that you actually need and then work out how to bring everything together with the knowledge that you have. Because at the end of the day, you're presenting to someone because you have knowledge and they want to hear from you. And it's really important to remember that, because I think that gets forgotten a lot. You are there for a reason and they do value your opinion. That's why they've come to hear you speak. And the last part is all about iterative improvement. So everything I was talking about with transcribing your audio and editing it and re-putting it back into speech, or trading with a colleague, or working out how you can be a better audience member, all of this comes back to giving yourself more opportunities to improve. Especially if you're only presenting once a year, it's really hard to get better if you're not working at it when you're not presenting. So all of this is giving you more opportunities to really make the most of it. So thanks everyone for coming. I will open up the questions now. So I'm Brooke Jamieson. I'm the experience lead at PlaceOS. We're a smart building and smart workplace company. You can find our website at Place Technology. I think this audience is probably better suited to looking at our GitHub though. We're open source, so you can see everything. We've done some really interesting stuff in Crystal lately. So if you don't know a lot about Crystal Lang, welcome. And I'll go through and see if there's any questions. There are not. If anyone would like to ask them on chat now, or alternatively, if anyone has a pet, please put the pet up to the camera just for my personal use.
I have a question, if that's all right.
Hi, Katie. Yeah, sure.
You recommended a book earlier in your presentation, one for how to convince people. What was the book again?
It's Catalyst.
Catalyst.
By Jonah Berger.
Yep.
Yes. I think it's only out in the last few months.
Cool.
All of his work is really useful. I believe he's from Wharton Business School. I think it's his third book. It's really interesting, and it's good because it's quite recent, so the examples are more recent. I found it really hard. Lots of the persuasion stuff is like, oh, read things to people in an FM DJ voice, and I think that only works if you're a 50-year-old man. So it's hard to apply. But all of this stuff about changing people's minds is more applicable to especially technical settings, given that that's probably what lots of us work in.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Any other questions or pets? Cool. Looks like there's not. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name is Brooke Jamieson, or find me at OS. I'm happy to field any questions, even if you come up with them a few days from now, because I know that always happens to me. But thanks so much, everyone, for coming. It was great to see you all. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.